Hello, class. We continue to look at the Bible. At the time that Moses was dying, or at the time before Moses died, he was instructed by this creator that we've been talking about, the God of Israel, to hand over to a young man who was his assistant. This man was Joshua, and it was the job of this man to lead the people of Israel from the Sinai wilderness into the promised land. We are leaving out some details you would find in the book, like that they had to wander around in that wilderness for a very long time. You would find those ones in the books. We are trying to give you the biggest picture. After the wandering in the wilderness had ended, Joshua led this nation into the promised land and served as their leader for a very long time. Before he passed on, he rededicated them to God via a very famous statement. He said that him and his family, him and his house would serve the Lord, that Israel has a right to choose. This was a sort of rededication. This was a sort of renewal of the covenant. You may remember it features very prominently in your readings. These people had a covenant with that God. The terms of the covenant is if the people would live by the religion and culture he will give them that we are seeing in the Bible, he will be their God, he would take special care of them. And by the time Joshua died, the people, being human, were always behaving like humans. Sometimes they would keep those commandments that God had given them through Moses. Sometimes they would not keep those commandments. And once they did not keep the commandments, that special provision in the covenant that God will not take care of them would come in, and their neighbors will oppress them. And special people we are taken from among them to lead them back to righteousness and thus invite the protection of God. It was a ding-dong affair. As you read, you will find all the judges were important, but some stood out very prominently. Figures like Samson. Samson was a kind of strong man. He delivered them from the hand of the Philistines, and it was, like I said, a ding-dong affair. They would sin today, God will look away from them. Their neighbors will oppress them. God will send to them a deliverer whom the Bible told us we are judges. Those judges will come, bring them closer to God again, and they will be strengthened to fight their enemies until at a stage the people faced the warlike Philistines. The Philistines were a seafaring people that came from Greece. Philistines. They were warlike, they were fierce warriors. They devastated these people whom we invariably call the Hebrews or the Israelites. So they thought that the only way to cope with the Philistine threat was to have a king like all their neighbors had. Interestingly, these people did not have a king while their neighbors had kings. They were egalitarian. They were led by principally their elders and their priests. So they approached a man who had become their priest and who was also a prophet. That figure was called Samuel. You would find very enlightening and very good stories about him, how he even came about. This is something you will find in the readings. They approached him and demanded for a king. Samuel himself was not happy because, being the prophet, being the priest, he knew the traditions of the people. The traditions of the people was that God himself would be their king. They would be not like any other nation in the world. They will be the nation that God would lead directly. But when they asked for kings, they had violated that covenant. So God was not happy. Samuel was not happy. Samuel protested to God, but God told him not to worry, that it was him, God, that was rejected, not Samuel, to go ahead and give the people a king. When the people noticed that the prophet was not happy and God was not happy, they wanted to take back their statement. These were awesome people. They wanted to withdraw their request, but God said no, they should be given a king, but tell them how that king will behave towards them. So Samuel read out what the king will do to them. The king will not be as friendly as God, but he also tried to control the quality. God tried to control the quality of that king, how he would behave. He will see his fellow Israelites as a brother. Ultimately, a figure called Saul was chosen to be their king, and this prophet Samuel anointed him. We will run through the story very fast. He began very well, but he ended very badly, and he fell short because he simply behaved like a human. He was given a specific instruction by God through the prophet. He did not carry it out well, and when it was time for him to give account, instead of admitting his fault, he began to look for excuses, and the prophet, acting at the behest of God, told him that God's favor had left his house and that he would be replaced. He was replaced by the very famous biblical character you must have heard about. This character was called David. He was the youngest son out of many sons of somebody from Bethlehem called Jesse. Secretly, the prophet anointed him and told him he would take over from the king. And the king began to suspect that, by the way, the most colorful story about David was how he defeated the Philistine champion called Goliath. And that brought him to the palace as somebody who defeated a man that had been threatening the people. So, but at a stage, the king became suspicious of him, wanted to eliminate him, but it didn't work. Ultimately, the king Saul died, and David replaced him as a king. David's story is very definitive. He started very well. At the middle of the road, tragedy fell again. He killed a loyal soldier called Uriah the Hittite and took over the wife and invited the wrath, the anger of God. In anger, I think I will tell you the story of what happened. A prophet called Nathan came to him and told him a story about a terrible thing that happened in Israel about a very poor man who had only one sheep, and who had a neighbor who had everything that could make life very beautiful. But this rich man was very avaricious, very greedy. So he went and killed that poor man and took only that one sheep he had. The king was infuriated when he heard this. He said, "What's the name? Who did this? That man will die today." The prophet said, "Thou art the man." The king fell on his knees, began to ask for forgiveness of God. God gave him the conditions for the forgiveness. The child, the product of that adulterous relationship, will die, and some other punishments will follow. And that happened, and he repented and had fairly good relations with God, but it was never like it was before. And the ending was not as good as the beginning. That the second child from that woman eventually succeeded him. That was the famous King Solomon you may have heard about. The Bible makes us to understand that at his time, he was the wisest man in the world. That was the son that succeeded King David. And King Solomon built a temple for God in Jerusalem, made Israel very grand. But as usual, again, he was human. he kept acquiring wives from all the neighboring peoples. Remember, these peoples he married into were not Israelites. So the wives came with their own traditions, and in order to maintain peace at home, when he was old, he joined them in straying into their traditions and religion, which took him away from his own, and he became an enemy of God. But through the prophets, God told him that the kingdom will not be split in his lifetime because of his father David. So he died. When he died, he was to be replaced by his son. Pay close attention here. And the son that will replace him was called Rehoboam. The elders of Israel, all Israel came to listen to the man that will replace Solomon, that is the son of Solomon. There were people who walked with the father that were there, and there were the youths. So all the people demanded of this king, your father was not very good to us. Remember, he built the temple, he built a palace, he used forced labor. Your father treated us badly. His hand was very heavy on us. How are you going to treat us so that we would serve you the way we served your father? He took counsel with the elders, people that worked with the father. They said to him, speak nicely to the people, be kind to them, be apologetic, be remorseful, apologize for the high-handedness of your father. He took that advice and kept it on one side, and then called the young people that were around him. He was 40. Sought counsel from them. They told him to tell the people that my father used whips against you, but I'm going to use scorpions. The people stood up and declared, to your tents, O Israel, what is our share in this monarchy? What's our gain? Your family has been enjoying it. It's not our business. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your first exams that I just gave you a breakdown of. The people stood up, left him, and you know what they did? Most of the people that left him belonged to the tribes of Israel that were not his own tribe and the one tribe that was close to his tribe. These two tribes I mentioned now were Judah and Benjamin. The other 10 tribes went the other way. The elders and people of the other tribes and people that were inside their own territories went away and joined one Israelite general called Jeroboam. You see, Israel had become divided. One was called Judah, the one that the house of David, Solomon, Rehoboam continued to rule, was called Judah, while the other half was called, retained the name Israel. These two began to fight. Brothers, sisters, they began to fight. For most of their existence, they were fighting. And but Judah was to some very little degree more stable. People from the house of David continued to rule over Judah, while the other one was simply ruled by strong generals. So it was the first kingdom to go. Israel was the first kingdom to fall apart. The people that brought it down were the Assyrians. History told us that they were good fighters and they were very aggressive. They were the first people to make modern missiles. They would use large stones, fling them with horses. They brought it down and sent the Israelites into exile. The Judeans lasted for some decades. They lasted more, but ultimately the fierce Babylonians also destroyed Judah and exiled it too. I want you to pay close attention to the recommended texts, including the Bible. This is where you get scholarly understandings of the stories I'm telling you. What I'm telling you is also a scholarly understanding on it, but when you read the required texts, including the Bible, you get a stronger view of it. Meanwhile, there is a class of people that walked alongside these kings. They were the prophets. We have been introduced to a few of them. Moses was the father of the prophets, the most important one. That was Moses. The Samuel I mentioned was also a prophet. But when the Bible talks about prophets, what it generally has in mind more are some figures that it presented as only as specifically as prophets. And for the purpose of this course, when we talk about prophets, all prophets are people who had the voice of God, used it to reprove the people, used it to improve the people. For the purposes of our study, we will look at them in two ways. They are the major prophets because they are the books of the Bible that discuss their works. We are very long. In this category, you would find Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and the rest. And then the minor prophets, they were not minor because their works were less important, but their books were small. Here you will find Hosea, you will find Amos. Yeah. Having dealt with the prophets now, you would find other books of the Old Testament that is necessary for us to be familiar with. The books that talk about the kings are essentially called the books, first and second book of Samuel, the book, first and second book of Kings, then the Chronicles. This is where you find the stories of the kings. You would also find the stories of the prophets in these books, but you would find the stories of the prophets and their activities also in books named after them. We will pause here. You have gotten a very good introduction to Israel from the period of the judges to the period of the kings to the exile. Read the required texts and get a clearer view of what we just discussed. Thank you. Have a nice day.